So don't make this mistake when you're learning how to code. What's up, guys? This is Ryan from elevatecyber, and I wanted to make this video to really address one of the problems that I see a lot of people struggling with here. Not just viewers of my videos, but a lot of newcomer programmers in other communities I've been in. I've seen this as well, and it's a very common pitfall, and that is trying to memorize code. So what I see a lot of times is people will they'll feel that they don't understand the code if they can't memorize it, right? If they can't just see a blank screen and reproduce a particular piece of code. But I'm here to tell you, actually, not only is that not a particularly useful thing, it's actually a complete waste of time, because if you ever see the some of the best developers work, right, like the professionals, they'll look stuff up all the time. And I've talked about this before, I know. But yeah, in particular, don't feel like you need to memorize the code, especially if you're following along with the video series that I'm making right now, and I have been for a while on Black Hat Python, right? We're writing a lot of Python code and creating various hacking tools, things like that, right? A lot of that code can be pretty cumbersome. There could be a lot to it, and I could definitely see how someone could feel that, I can't memorize this, so I don't know the code, I don't understand it, right? The main thing is that if you read it line by line, can you understand what's happening? Can you get the gist of what is happening with the code, right? That is one of the most important parts. And another reason why it's just a fruitless endeavor to try to memorize it is because, let's say you memorize some code of how to do some complex process, right? Well, most likely that code is going to utilize some kind of library, and technology changes very quickly. So right now in 2021, that might be the standard way to do it, but maybe in 5 years, a new library comes out and it has the same functionality, and that's the new official way to do it. And all that code that you memorized back then is no longer relevant. Maybe that library goes out of date. It's no longer maintained, right? It's no longer used, and now you got to do it this other way. And if you are so focused on the individual keys to press, right, and you don't look at the big picture, you don't understand what the library is actually doing, then that's more detrimental to you, right? Even though you spend all this time and effort memorizing these lines, right? It's kind of like learning how to fish, if you will, right? I mean, if you just memorize a set of steps, right, that might work then and there, but it doesn't really teach you what you need to know overall. So how would I recommend going about learning to code? If you don't go about memorizing it, then what would I recommend, right? So I would say try to understand the big picture, right? Understand what's happening. Because another thing is that, like I was saying earlier, a lot of times you're probably dealing with some kind of library. And what is a library other than code that someone else has already written that abstracts something away? So even if you memorize the library, right, how a piece of code is written in a library, well, that library already is abstracting away a lot of the underlying stuff. And, oh, by the way, the library they wrote, that code was abstracted away, right? Because there's lower levels, right? If you're writing something in Python, C is a lower level than that. And then even if you write it in C, assembly is lower than that. And even if you write it in plain assembly language, well, binary is lower than that. You're not going to be writing anything in binary, obviously, right? That's the language of computers. And so there will always be some kind of abstraction. Okay, so don't get too bogged down in knowing every fine detail either. That goes a little bit beyond don't memorize code, but also don't get bogged down in every little detail and feeling like you have to understand every little step of something, right? If it's something that you use enough, you are going to memorize it just out of, for the sake of efficiency, right? You're naturally going to remember how to do something or do it enough till you remember. And at that point, memorizing it makes sense, right? Because, our brains, we're basically wired to remember the things that are important. And if our brain doesn't see something as being important information, then we simply won't remember it. And that's a useful function, right? So, for example, a lot of my channel, I'm using the request library in Python all the time because I'm making requests, get requests, post requests, things like that. And in the very beginning, I used this a long time ago, like 5 years ago when I was using Python, or 3 years ago even. And then when I got back into making these videos and back into coding some projects on my own, I started using this library a lot again. And in the very beginning, yeah, sure, I had to look it up to refresh my memory. But now I've been using it so much that I don't really have to look things up with it generally. I can just use it, and I basically, for all intents and purposes, I memorized it. But that's not something that I explicitly set out to do. It's just I'm using it so much that I'm remembering it, right? Just like you remember, if you know Python, you probably remember how to define functions and things like that, right? Things that you do a lot, you'll remember how to do it, right? You'll learn what you need to learn, but I wouldn't go out of my way to necessarily memorize code, and certainly not over understanding what it does. So that's something that I try to really nail home in my videos on, the Black Hat Python series. Go ahead and check out those videos. If you haven't already, I'll go ahead and link them at the end of the video. But one thing I really try to drive home there is just showing you how I'm walking through the code line by line, and I am showing you guys what's happening and where. And I'm even showing you, okay, here's where things can get a little tricky. So in order to understand it, maybe I'm going to pull up the documentation to see what this method is doing, or this library here, what it's doing, right? Or even if it's in basic Python, like vanilla Python, I might open up an interpreter and say like, okay, this is what this is creating. This is like this data type, and you're running it through this method, and it's returning this data type, things like that, right? So utilize all of those things, but yeah, the focus should be on understanding what is happening instead. And I think what you'll find is that if you can do this, and you can go out and write some code on your own too, when you're learning. I think a lot of people also fall trapped to spending too much time on tutorials. I know some people that only ever did tutorials. That has to be a really boring way to write code. I always hated it. I would do the minimum amount of tutorials that I had to do just to know what I'm doing. But then I always prefer to go out and start my own projects, do my own things with it, because that's when you will have the absolute most fun with coding, is when you're building something real, something useful to you, and that's the payoff, right? The payoff is that in the end, you're left with some really cool code that will do something that will make life easier for yourself, or at least provide some kind of value to you, and it's something that you created from scratch, essentially. So I think that's one of the really cool ways to do it. It's definitely way more motivating to me than if I'm just following examples on like a Udemy course or a book or something like that. So I would definitely recommend giving that a try. I think what you'll find is that if you do that, it'll be a lot easier. It will help you with your pen testing as well, because it'll put you in the frame of mind of being able to think like the attacker, to think like the developer, so that when you're attacking these applications, you can already have a better feel for where some of these vulnerabilities might arise, right? Where some of these inputs might be, and what are the implications of it. I just think it's really good all around, because obviously if you are trying to hack something, if you have knowledge of how to build that thing you're trying to hack, then that's going to make you that much better as a pen tester. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. As always, I love to hear your input, and if you have any suggestions for videos or anything like that, you guys always do a great job about that. And like I said, if you want to check out these videos on my Black Hat Python series, I got them on the screen right now. So I'll see you guys right over there. Thanks for watching.